Okay, this object of study, that is just a chapter or a beginning introductory chapter in his book. In the book, the course in general linguistics. The course in general linguistics that was written by Ferdinand de Saussure. Okay, this Ferdinand de Saussure was a Swiss linguist who studied in Germany. Okay, he studied in Germany, but he's a Swiss linguist. Okay, yeah, Saussure is widely regarded as the father of modern linguistics. Okay, he is regarded as the father of modern linguistics. And then he developed, actually, he played an important role with his study, which act as a seminal part in the development of structuralism. Okay, his ideology or his discussion, we can say, his insights into the study of language. Okay, they act as a seminal part. They played seminal part in the development of structuralism. Okay, structuralism was developed based on the ideologies of this Ferdinand de Saussure. Ferdinand de Saussure didn't give any name as a structuralism. Okay, he just proposed some concepts, and based on those concepts, the structuralism was developed. Okay, so his ideology played the seminal part in the development of structuralism as a method in the human sciences. This structuralism became a method in the human sciences. Okay, human sciences. So not only the study of language, for all the human sciences, this structuralism became crucial to study those disciplines. Economics, politics, environmental, that means, sociology, anthropology, all these human sciences. Okay, they adopted this structuralism to study in their parts, in their disciplines, right? So this theory was never published by Saussure himself. Actually, his ideologies and this theory was never published by this Ferdinand de Saussure himself in a complete and authoritative form. Okay, his disciples after his death, his colleagues published. Okay, based on his lecture notes. Okay, so this is the course in general linguistics. It goes under his name was compiled. Actually, even the book itself, the course in general linguistics, it was compiled by his colleagues after the death of Ferdinand de Saussure, when based on his lecture notes. Okay, he already prepared lecture notes. So those lecture notes in the form of book were published. Okay, so now from that French language, its most recent translator and editor, Roy Harris. Okay, Roy Harris translated, of course, earlier one or two attempted, but this Roy Harris, he successfully translated this, the course in linguistics from French language to English language, right? That's why later, after some years, the course in general linguistics was available to the readers of English people, to the English readers. Okay. So before Saussure, what is the practice? To study the language. Okay, yeah, Ferdinand de Saussure, he proposes something. Okay, but before him, okay, based on his lectures, based on his ideology, structuralism was emerged. Okay, but before this Saussure, this Ferdinand de Saussure, what is the process? Okay. So, before Saussure, the study of language or philology, as it was usually called, had been essentially historical, tracing change and development in phonology and semantics within and between languages or groups of languages, right? Groups of languages. Okay, so here, dear students, actually the history of language study may be understood in three phases. At the beginning, the scholars they studied the grammar of a particular language. The grammar of a particular language. That is grammatology. Yeah, am I audible? The study of language. The study of language. Okay, at the beginning was grammatology. That is the study of grammar. Later, the scholars felt that it is not enough to study any specific language. Okay, then they started to study by comparing different languages. Okay, that process we call philology. Philology, the comparative linguistic study, the comparative study of languages. Okay, and now now at present, yeah, the third phase. Okay, the present phase is linguistics, the study of language in general, what is universal, right? So anyhow, before this Ferdinand de Saussure, okay, usually the study of language or philology, okay, it was usually called as philology, had been essentially historical. In that philological study, the language is studied historical or the history of the language and a historical change and a development in phonology and a semantics within and between languages or groups of languages. Okay, before Ferdinand de Saussure, this is the process. But this is Saussure, he argued that a scientific linguistics could never be based on such a diachronic study. A scientific linguistics could never be based on such a diachronic study, but only by approaching language as a synchronic system. That is a system of which all the elements and roles are in the theory simultaneously available to the user of the languages. Users of the language. You see, he argued, try to understand his main argument carefully. This Saussure argued that a scientific linguistics could never be based on such a diachronic study. What is diachronic study? The historical study of the language, going back to the history and understanding the language and its meaning and its context in a particular situation, right? The contextual meaning of that particular word. Okay, that was in practice earlier or in the history. But he argues that the true or a scientific linguistics can be approached as a synchronic system of language. Okay, he argues that the synchronic study is important. The synchronic study of language is important, or synchronic system. Studying language as a synchronic system, that is a system of which all the elements and rows are in the theory. Okay, in this study, even in any study that is diachronic or synchronic, in any study we formulate, or these linguists may formulate some rows and they may discuss some elements. Okay, in theory, they may be available in theory. But this Ferdinand de Saussure, he argues that, okay, these elements and the rules that are in theory should be available simultaneously to the user of the language. Okay, to the user of the language, those elements and those rules should be available simultaneously to the theory. Okay, it is not enough to have the rules in the form of a theory. Okay, or in a particular theory, it is not enough to have rules and elements. Okay, simultaneously in practice, those rules and those elements should be simultaneously available to the reader or to the user of the language. Okay, when is it possible? If it is a contemporary language, if the language that is present in use. Yeah. So when when a reader or a language learner reads some particular grammatical rule, that grammatical rule immediately available now or immediately that should be in practice now at present language. Okay. So then, so that they can use in their language. That's why Ferdinand de Saussure, he argued that the contemporary language or the contemporary usage of the language is evidentially taken to be studied. Okay, so this present language, what we use, what is in practice, okay, that should be studied, that should be analyzed so that the rules and the elements may be extracted. Okay, so this is the argument from Ferdinand de Saussure. Okay, he restricted diachronic language. He what is it? Yeah, he restricted diachronic linguistics. Okay, and he proposed synchronic system of language. Okay, so here already in first semester we studied what are the distinctions this Ferdinand de Saussure made. Okay, such as language, L-A-N-G-A-G-E, language, or universal language, we can say. And another one, lang, L-A-N-G-U-E, lang. And the third one, parole, parole. These are the words we discussed in the first semester. Okay, see, Saussure's discussion of the object of study in linguistics depends crucially on a distinction between language, lang, and parole. Okay, yeah, those three words are French words. Okay, now in English they were translated as a language, the universal, a language, a particular, and speech, that is parole. Parole as a speech, individual act of speech, we can say. Okay, so language is made up of words, and another seminal contribution of Saussure was his analysis of word as a verbal sign having two sides. As a verbal sign having two sides, that is signifier and signifier. That is a significant and signified. That is in translation, signifier and signified. Signifier and signified, right? So this is a brief introduction about Ferdinand de Saussure and his ideology. Okay, so actually our topic is the object of study. What do you think? What is object? Object is the target or the aim or the specific aim, that is object. Okay, here in this topic we are going to discuss this topic in three subheadings. Okay, the first subheading is on defining a language, another one, linguistic structure, its place among the facts of language. And the third point, languages and their place in human affairs. That is semiology. I think better write down these points. Okay, first one is on defining a language. Second one, linguistic structure, its place among the facts of language. And the third one, languages and their place in human affairs. That is semiology, right? Okay, dear students, let me start with the first point. on defining a language. Okay. Actually, before having any particular object, okay, first we should be able to have a clear idea what we are going to study. What is that subject matter? Then only we can frame a particular object. That's why he started with defining a language. Yeah, see, other sciences are provided with the objects of study given in advance, which are then examined from different points of view. In case of other sciences, in case of other human sciences or natural sciences or biological sciences or physical sciences, whatever it may be, the objects of study were given in advance. But the case of linguistics is not like that. When this linguistics started the study of language, or when the scholars started to study the language, they didn't have clear objectives of study. They didn't have clear objectives of study. Nothing like that in the case in linguistics. Okay, without having the object is not given in advance of the viewpoint. Okay, if there is a particular object, then there may be a viewpoint. But here, in case of this linguistics, the object was not given in advance. The object was not given in advance, right? So that's why, far from it. Rather, one might say that it is the viewpoint adopted which creates the objects. Okay, first, if we have a particular viewpoint, then at least based on the viewpoint, the objects may be framed. Based on the viewpoints, the objects may be framed. That's why he says, okay, Ferdinand de Saussure, he first proposed viewpoints. He first proposed viewpoints so that the objects of study may be framed. The objects of study may be framed, right? So, in linguistic phenomena, always present two contemporary facets. Okay, the viewpoint which is adopted in linguistic phenomena always present two complementary facets, each depending on the other. Okay, he proposed some Ferdinand de Saussure. He proposed he proposed two facets of every point from the beginning to the end of this defining of a word, defining a language. Okay, you see, he starts with observing the mechanism of speech. That is, see, the first viewpoint. Okay, the ear perceives articulated syllables as auditory impressions. Try to understand these arguments carefully. If you do not understand these arguments carefully, you can't understand the topic. That's why be conscious to understand these points. See, the ear, our ear receives articulated syllable. Who articulated syllables? The speaker articulates syllables. Okay, when the speaker articulates the syllables, then the receiver or the listener will receive, or the ear of the receiver or ear of the listener perceives the articulated syllable by the speaker as auditory impression. Auditory impression. One is articulation, another one auditory. Understand this point carefully. When the speaker produces some sounds, that is articulation. If those sounds are received by the listener, that is auditory. Okay, auditory. So when the ear receives articulated syllables, as auditory impressions. These are auditory impressions. But the sounds in question would not exist without the vocal organs. Okay, okay. They may ask something. If the speaker gives some information, we simply listen and we simply perceive. But if the speaker asks a question, then as a listener, we have to answer. Then how do we answer? Surely we have to use our vocal organs to produce our answer to the question of the speaker. From this point, what can you understand? Every listener will be the speaker and every speaker will be the listener. Okay, two sides here you have to understand. One is articulatory side, articulatory impression or articulatory system. Another one, auditory impression. Okay, so as a speaker, he may articulate the sounds. That is articulated syllable. Right? As a listener, you may receive or perceive those sounds. Okay, those sounds, what we perceive are, okay, auditory impressions. Right? So, yeah, this is the first distinction. He first distinguished auditory impressions and articulated syllables. Then furthermore, he moves to another discussion, another proposition. That is, even if we ignore this phonetic duality, okay, what we discussed now, that is articulated syllable and auditory impression. That is a phonetic duality, you can say. Okay, and even if we ignore this phonetic duality with language, then be reducible to phonetic facts? No. Speech sounds are only the instruments of thought. He's going to propose another two sides of this idea. Speech sounds are only the instrument of thought and have no independent existence. Here, speech and thought, he says. Earlier, articulated syllables, auditory impressions. Now he is going to distinguish speech and thought. First, the thought is there in our mind. When we have the thought in our mind, then that thought will be translated or will be encoded in the form of a speech. That speech may be sent to the listener. Again, the listener will receive that message or the speech and he may interpret our thought. He may try to understand or he may try to make make his own idea, what our idea may be, what our thought may be, right? That's why here, this Ferdinand de Saussure, he proposes that it is a duality. Even the speech sounds are only the instrument of thought. Okay, when there is a thought, there is only speech sound. If there is no thought, there are no speech sounds. You see, when there is no thought, there are no speech sounds, right? That's why we can say here, dear students, speech sounds have no independent existence. That's why a sound itself is a complex auditory articulatory unit. Okay, he is trying to mix these 2 points and come up with he may come up with a particular idea. See, A sound, for Ferdinand de Saussure, a sound itself a complex auditory articulatory unit in turns combines with an idea to form another complex unit, both the physiological and psychological. Physiological and psychological. Try to understand this point. First, he added a property to the sound as auditory impression and articulatory syllable. Okay, he added, or he can't attribute it, articulated syllable and auditory impression. Now he is going to make another proposition. Okay, by this example or by this discussion, that is, speech is not independent. Speech is not independent. It is dependent of the thoughts. Okay, then he says, yeah, already by the previous point, we came to know that a sound is auditory articulatory unit. Auditory articulatory unit. But now, okay, in turn, now that sound combines with an idea to form another complex unit. Okay, another complexity was attributed by Ferdinand de Saussure. That is physiological, that is speech, and psychological, that is sound. Okay, physiological speech and psychological, that is thought. He attributed two more properties to the word sound, right? And another point he is going to discuss with us. That is, language has an individual aspect and a social aspect. Language has an individual aspect and a social aspect, right? So individually, we have our own language. We can speak whatever we want and we can use whatever the vocabulary we wish to use. At the same time, we should never forget that our language is social phenomena. Our language is social phenomena. Okay, in the society, we have to use the language. Okay, so when we use a particular word or a particular sentence, that should be socially acceptable word or socially acceptable sentence, right? That's why he says that language is individual as well as social. Language is individual as well as social. Okay. So, dear students, here we discussed 6 points here, or three distinctions. Okay, Ferdinand de Saussure. First, he proposed that a sound is articulatory and auditory. Articulatory and auditory. Okay, when we speak, that is articulated syllable. When we listen, articulated syllable, that is auditory impression. That's why. Okay, a sound is a complex unit of auditory and articulator. Okay, it is auditory and articulatory unit. Okay, he proposed another point that speech sounds are only the instrument of thought and have no independent existence. That's why he says that. Okay, another complexity he is going to add, that is, it is both the physiological in the sense that the mix of the psychological and physical. Okay, that is speech. Okay, and another one, that is psychological, that is thought. Okay, that is thought. Okay, so dear students, okay, another distinction he made is language has an individual aspect. Language has an individual aspect as well as social aspect, two phases. Individual aspect of the language and the social aspect of the language. Individually you can use, but you are bound to the society and the language is social phenomena. That's why you have to use that language within the boundary of the society. But for your self-expression, you may write poems, you may write novels, you may write dramas. That is individual aspect of language. Individual aspect of language. Okay, whatever you may wish, whatever you may wish to express, you can express. That is individually. Okay, but in the social, in case of social phenomena, we should be able to distinguish from social aspects. We should be able to use the vocabulary, the sentences from keeping in mind the social phenomena or the society. Okay, our words, our sentences should not be socially aberrant. Should not be socially aberrant. Okay, so dear students, okay, yeah, with this, I would like to conclude today's class so that we can discuss the remaining points in the next class. But in the next day class, that is on Monday, I will ask these points again. You have to answer me, because if you do not understand these basic points, you can't understand what is the definition of language according to Ferdinand de Saussure, right? That's why you have to be very conscious and better revise again these points. Okay.